Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm covering the expansion to Scarface 1920, Bloody Business. Now, before we dive into this, a few disclaimers. First of all, I work for GameFound, take that into account. This is not a paid playthrough, but this campaign is launching over on GameFound, so take any potential bias into account. Secondly, this is a prototype. All rules and components subject to change. Well, technically speaking, not all rules and components. Most of what you see here is from the base game, but there are certain things over here from the expansions, and those are expansion and prototype components subject to change, and I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. With that, I'm going to be focusing on Bloody Business in this review, in this opinion of the expansion, what it does, what it adds. I will not be talking about what the base game does. I will be walking into this overview with assuming you know how Scarface 1920 operates. If you don't, there's plenty of other video coverage. In fact, there's even a review over on my channel. You can check that out. There's gameplays. There's a lot of information out there about the original base game, but this will be a very, very long video if I'm teaching the base game, so I'm focusing primarily on the expansion for the sake of this video. Past that, very, very high-level overview of Scarface 1920 is it's an area control deck building game with a whole lot going as you send out your various associates to various areas on the board, trying to accomplish a variety of things, from getting in bed with the authorities, from gathering more people, building out your deck, trying to take control of areas of the board, a whole lot of area control and deck building and action selection going on until eventually the timer runs out and you see who has the most money as they've most efficiently managed their, their operations, their gun smuggling, their alcohol, all those things throughout the course of the game. The expansion Bloody Business is going to be adding a bunch of new things. There's a lot of things being added in Bloody Business. We're going to cover them one at a time, starting off with the fact that there's angry bosses. You're going to have these guys over here, these characters, these angry bosses effectively, which go on the board. All the existing factions, all the existing gangs, as well as the two new gangs, which we'll talk about as well, have an angry boss character, which is effectively a physical representation of the boss on their board, and that boss, that character, when you use that miniature towards various actions, is going to use the various stats of the bosses in question towards the action that they're taking, so it gives you another degree of gravitas as far as the boss on the board. Additionally, you're going to have the addition of doctors and hospitals. This sideboard over here, there's a whole sideboard over here, which I guess I'll show it to you for the sake of this right now, but I'm going to move this onto camera. You can see there's a ton of things going on. This sideboard is going to be added to your already fairly large table presence on the board, and one of the things that sideboard adds, it adds a lot of the areas where you'll be managing the new elements of the game, but it adds a hospital area where, first of all, that's where your angry boss is going to go whenever they get killed, but it's also where your various associates will go whenever they get shot. They're going to be going to the hospital instead of some of the areas you have on your normal board, when you have your previous board, which is these guys over here, which is normally where you go through a sequence of people. You're going to be moving people to the hospital instead, and there's going to be a variety of ways to get them out, from reorganization turns, bullets, which is something we'll come to later in this game, later in this review, but also these doctors. You're going to have new doctors cards that get added to each gang's deck, and those doctors are going to give you another way to take out people from the hospital. So it adds kind of a new dimensional shift as far as how your associates or people are going to get wounded and go through that recovery process in the game. There's also going to be street gangs. Street gangs are going to be this giant deck of cards over here, which is going to go off to the side on that player board on the side. But you're going to have street gangs that give you just a ton of cards that will let you hit various people on the board, but also let you choose one of two abilities in them. Just small little abilities you can get your hands on, and you can get your hands on these cards through the use of bullets, which we'll talk about shortly, or let's talk about them now. Bullets. Bullets are going to be a currency in the game that gets added as another currency to manage in the game. You're going to get bullets based on how many cards you discard from your plan at the end of every cycle, and so you're going to gather those bullets and trade them in for a ton of things. To get street gangs, to remove or exchange business markers. Those are going to be the various business markers that go on the board in different ways. You're going to remove and exchange business markers. To ignore job requirements. Lots of the jobs in the game are going to give you different requirements that you need to fulfill, and those bullets can be used towards avoiding some of those job requirements. To heal from the hospital, which you mentioned briefly, or to spend a bunch of bullets to gather money from various districts. So you have a bunch of ways you can trade in bullets, but it's another currency to manage that you can trade in every single turn. Speaking of removing or exchanging business markers, there's going to be an additional track to the game. Let me move this back off so I can bring this back on camera. There's going to be an additional track where you're going to manage the business markers that aren't on the board, aren't the board at the beginning of the game, and that's going to give you a kind of a variable income aspect to the business markers. It kind of treats a bit more of a stock market aspect as you manage those business markers in the game, and that changes it from being a default value, and you're managing that kind of, not really a stock market, but just a variable degree of value towards the business markers as well, giving you a little bit more nuance or strategy to how those operate. Additionally, a big one of my favorite ones is going to be, favorite ones, we'll talk about opinions after. One of the ones that I enjoy is definitely going to be the candidates in the game. You're going to have a deck of candidates over here that are going to go onto the job board as well, onto this candidate area over here, and each candidate is double-sided. You're going to choose one red, one blue candidate in the game, and then face them off against each other, which is going to give you different scoring objectives of different ways you score points at the end of the game. Throughout the course of the game, whenever you go to the authorities, you'll have the opportunity to earn various vote markers, and you can go ahead and cast those towards your candidate, which means you're also playing a game in this of trying to be mindful of what players are going for, how many vote markers they have. They'll hide them behind the screen, but you can track to a certain degree just a general sense of how often they're visiting the authorities, and it's going to give a different voting mechanism at the end of the game of extra ways to score points and money in the game, which is another thing to manage. The theme of this expansion is another thing to manage. We'll get into all of these things as you go through it. There's also going to be most wanted bonuses. These are going to be various bonus markers that go in here, and as you acquire associates, you're going to get those bonus markers. There are all of these over here. They'll be moving on to the spots, giving you different bonuses you get, and whenever you take associates of other types will go ahead and get more business bonus markers. It's kind of another way of getting things while ensuring the market or the types of cards are flowing throughout the course of the game. There's going to be a large stack of G-Men cards over here, although you will not be using. This gives you a ton of variety since you're only going to be using one of these at a time over here, but from these cards, you're going to have a G-Men card that's going to give you an effect. Well, we have to talk a bit more about the G-Men marker first, which is over here. This is going to be a G-Men marker that goes on the raid track, kind of in reverse of Elliot Ness. Elliot Ness starts off at the bottom of the raid track and works his way up, and the G-Men starts at the top and works his way down. The relevance of that is as you achieve certain raids, for every spot that your marker is above the G-Men marker, you're going to be paying a penalty, and that's going to be this card. Again, you'll choose a random card. That card will be in play for the game, and you have to pay that penalty for each spot above Melvis Purse, he's the G-Men marker, that you are on the crime track. You're going to have to pay that difference over there. Additionally, each card gives an additional effect to the policemen. Players cannot use benefits from the cars and people next to the associate over there. So you have all these things over here that are going to be giving you just a whole stack of cards, giving you a different benefit to the police of how they operate, and an additional penalty you're going to be paying for being above the G-Men marker as you go through the game. That's going to be another aspect over here. I think we're slowly starting to cover most of the stuff before we get to the two new gangs. One thing it's going to have is going to have the fact that you're also going to be adding in new associates, new jobs, new associates, new news cards, jobs, and raids. So just more card variety are going to be thrown in. For myself, I particularly like new jobs. That gives you, I'm a huge fan of the jobs in the original game and how powerful they can be and feel as you play through the game, and just more of those are good. The associates, news, and raid cards are good as well. Raids, I don't know if I felt the need for more of them. I mean, more is always good, but I'd say that I feel it most with the jobs, and then associates, news, and raids is all good things as well. And I think lastly, the last thing we're going to have is the addition of the two new gangs. You're going to be given two new gangs, the Charlie Gong and the Rocco and Bessie. The Golden Oaks and the Red Dragon's Tongue over here are going to be two different gangs that operate in the game, and both of them come in with a high degree of asymmetry. Now, the gangs in the base game already are very strongly asymmetrical, but these give you entirely new resources to manage, which is a whole different level of asymmetry. And in the case of the Golden Oaks, two separate bosses and different ways to move up the tracks with those boss markers. You're going to have two separate boss cards, and you're going to activate two abilities instead of three when you play each one. So, very different in the way they get executed in the game. But in the case of the Dragon's Tongue over here, they're going to be managing the opium. And so you're going to start off with the designated area on the board, you're going to have an opium den in play, and you're going to have the opportunity to play these opium cards as you go, as you expand outwards and place more opium dens, slowly spreading across the board. You have to place them adjacent to each other, but as you spread across the board with your opium, you're going to have more opium production and also have the ability to play these cards more frequently. These cards will refresh, but you get to keep adding more stronger cards that you can do more stuff based on the number of opium markers you have on the board, and you're managing opium as a currency, including having an opium dealer on the board. They all have their own individual bonuses of the things they can do, of course, the ways that they're generally asymmetric, but then past that, the addition of an entirely new resource to opium is going to be something else to manage and to understand as you go through the game. And then similarly, the Golden Oaks have two facets going on that make them kind of different. First of all is they have two bosses over here. We have two separate boss markers over here, although their angry boss is represented by a single miniature, and you're going to have two separate boss cards. You're going to activate two of their abilities from their track over here. You're going to activate two of their abilities each single time. Choose two from three instead of choosing from three, giving you more difference as far as how you're going to use and operate your boss cards, and then how you're going to move up. As you upgrade through the track, you have two separate linear tracks instead of one that occurs throughout the board, but then additionally you're managing your liquor supply instead. So instead of having your dealer supply, you're going to have a liquor supply. Worth noting to the eagle-eyed amongst you, there are some small misprints on these expansion things, so if some things are a little off, that's because there's some small misprints there, but you're managing your liquor supply, which similar to opium is an entirely different resource you're going to be running as far as how you can start making sales of your liquor, but then then cashing in, whenever you make a sale, you're going to go ahead and bump this up, which is going to increase the price and benefits you get from your liquor supply, moving the price to 4, then 5, then 7, etc. as you go through this over here. So again, you're managing a different resource as you go through it as far as how you, well, deal with your liquor in the game. And that's basically the new content over here. So an entirely new sideboard with G-Men, with the street gangs, the most wanted, with the candidates, with the variable tracks for the variable value businesses, managing a hospital, managing the angry bosses, 2 new factions, a ton of things being added, and of course the bullets and the entire resource economy that those generate as you discard cards from your plan. That's going to be all the things that are added in the Bloody Business expansion from, well, for Scarface 1920. Which brings us to the review part of things. How do I feel about these things? How do I feel about these additions? And there's a lot. For better and for worse, there's a lot going on in this expansion. And I would say that it's my opinion of the new things is almost all of it I liked, with possible, we'll get through all of them. Most of the things I liked, but I would say the more interesting thing though to me is they all add complexity on a game that is already not the simplest to pick up. So while I enjoyed many of the things that the expansion elements add, to me I'm going to be focusing on both did I enjoy certain elements, but also kind of in final thoughts a bit more around should you be incorporating these, should you not, do you need these, and those kinds of things. And to that end, going through my opinion of, well, each of the things, the new content in general, always a plus for me. Again, in particular the jobs, I like new content for these games, I like the jobs for the games, everything else, some I felt more of a benefit than others, but overall, I'm happy there's new content. I like new content that just expands the variety of the game system without expanding the complexity of the game system. The 2 new gangs are kind of going to go hand in hand with everything I said. I like the variety of having more gangs at the table. It's going to give you inherently a lot more asymmetry as far as different ways you can combine things as you play things out. I would highly recommend these not be the first gangs you play with. They kind of have, all the gangs have a degree of asymmetry, and these 2 new ones add additional full elements to, again, an already complicated game, and I don't think they're that complicated, but I certainly would not recommend these as the first gangs to dive into. Once you've played a game or 2 and you want the additional variety and you understand the systems at play, sure, they're not a ton extra, and they are a lot of fun, but they are, and you could even add them to the base game as is, you don't need the expansion stuff, so they are good, they're more variety, more differences, they add more complexity in a way that does feel rewarding as you play through them, but I really highly encourage that they not be the first gangs you play with, just because they add more on top of an already complicated game. The angry bosses is fun. It's just another way to have that manifestation of your bosses. Obviously, it incentivizes upgrading your bosses even more, even faster, because you get that additional benefit, but you're all playing on that same playing field. I like the angry bosses, and the amount of complexity this adds is incredibly minimal as far as what it does. The doctors and hospitals, the whole aspect of managing the hospital and how your people die, that one I'm kind of mixed on, because I don't know if that's inherently more complicated, but it is more of a pivot, a shift. If you're used to the way Scarface 1920 works, you have to change the way that sequence of hitting people works in the game. I don't know if I felt that it added or enhanced the gameplay. I don't know if I felt it took it away either. It's just different as far as what it does. So not worse, not better, just relearning how you deal with people who die in the game. You're also going to have the street gangs and the general bullet economy. Now, again, that's an area where I like the bullet economy. I like the flexibility of what you can do with bullets. It's another currency to manage, which means more decision space, and with the 5 things you can do, it's not overwhelming. There's just a few more things. You can get street gangs, you can exchange business markers, you can ignore job requirements. That's very flexible. It gives you a lot of flexibility, so that sometimes those jobs in your hand that you might not feel you have the opportunity to, suddenly you have a lot more flexibility of how they operate. You can heal from the hospital, which goes into that, and then finally you can trade then a bunch of them for getting money from various districts, so it's not overwhelming. Once you start playing through, you can pick that up very easily, especially if you have a cheat sheet or play rate or any of those things around. I like the bullet economy. Again, it's like everything else I'm saying, it's more on top of an already complicated system, so it's something that does add complexity to the game, but I do like what it does. The candidates, I'm a little bit more mixed on. I know I said that I instinctively out of my gut, I said I like them, but I paused because I like the concept of the candidates, and I like the additional element of the voting system. But that kind of thing is very group or player dependent as you go through it, in the sense that you could have a fairly decent point swing shift based on how players vote in the game, and so in addition to the entire game that you're already playing and managing as you go through it, suddenly you have to be mindful of what other players are doing and whether you're going to be the last man standing on an island voting for your own thing while everyone else votes against it. And so it adds more strategy, more things to consider, more things to be mindful of, and might shift you or pivot you more towards an authority-based approach, because that will give you more voting power. And so I do like, first of all, thematically it's one of my favorite aspects to add to the game, which is why I said I like it, because thematically I like the idea of throwing in voting for the mayor of Chicago as a background principle to the game. I like the concept, but it is sometimes group dependent, and it's the kind of thing that depending on how it goes, you might might find yourself playing an otherwise great game and then feeling like you got stiffed a bit on just playing against the other players on that. So something to manage, something to consider. It could be something that is not satisfying because you can play an entire game that is very well done and then lose a chunk of points from this. So I like it. I do like it, with some caveats as far as being mindful around it. The G-Man effect, I like the variety that gives. I like the idea that every single game I play, the police have a different effect in play. I like that. Just, again, giant stack of cards. Each of them will give you a different way of how, you know, hey, extra effect. Player spend $5 as police bribery instead of $2. Totally changes the economy of what you can deal with, whether you can afford to deal with the police. Extra effect. When a police is moved into a district, each player hits one of their people in that district. It totally changes the way you approach the game as far as the police thing. A single ability here, changing the police, it gives you a ton of variety, and I like that aspect. I don't like as much having the G-Men marker on the track, and again, it's something else to manage as far as another currency. And there are things being given to you in this game, so it makes sense that there's a degree of taking away, but I'm okay with the top effect aspect of the G-Men marker, but I really like the additional variety of how the police operate in the game. And so I think that's covered. Oh, the most wanted as well. Most wanted I was kind of ambivalent on. Again, that goes to that aspect of it does give you more things, so you're getting these more bonuses even as you have more costs, so there is that trade-off and balance, so it is helpful in that sense. I don't know if I felt strongly about it past potentially whatever it adds to the balance of what the expansion is bringing to the table. And so I guess moving into final thoughts, now we've covered like piece by piece how I feel about these things. Moving into final thoughts on Bloody Business, to me Bloody Business takes on a very specific theme of just how I feel about this entire expansion, which is I like it. It's good. It adds variety to the game, it adds things to the game, and most of the systems I think integrate fairly well with what this game is doing, but it adds all that with a lot of complexity. If you walk into Scarface 1920 for the first time, and you add Bloody Business to the game, that is an overwhelming amount of information to take in, because Scarface 1920 already starts as a complicated game. Not intuitive. Once you start playing, you can pick it up, but this is a lot of pieces of information to know, and adding this just adds a lot more. If you have a few games under your belt and you're ready for more and you think you want more of the system, I think Bloody Business will give you more. It's the kind of expansion that to me, it kind of makes me think of Blood Rage, of the gods of Asgard and mystics of is that what they're called again? I can't remember the names of them, but the mystics and the gods in Blood Rage kind of are, to me, expansions that they add variability to what the game Blood Rage does, but they don't inherently improve the game. And I think that's very much how I feel with Bloody Business. I think there are aspects of this that add some degrees of improvement, but for the most part, this to me adds more differences. More things that I can confidently say, yeah, I like that, I like that, I like that. Do I feel the expansion is essential? I do not feel it's essential. I think that your game of Scarface 920 is fully enjoyable as is, and this is excellent for mixing up that game. If you want more for this game, I think this is great. But I don't know if there's much here that I felt was absolutely essential to your experience. The gangs, maybe. I like having more gangs. When you play Scarface 920 as a 4-player game, you're always going to have the factions in play, and so if you want that variety from the gangs, I do like that a lot. The other elements are all good elements that give you different ways to approach it, give you different things to consider, and to a certain extent, I don't want to say they enhanced my game, but they gave me more things to consider within the game, but at the cost of complexity. So where am I at this one as far as rating? I'm going to keep the same rating I currently have for Scarface 1920, which is a 4 out of 5. I think the expansion is good. I like what it adds. I don't think it's essential. It did not improve my experience, but it does give you more things to consider within that experience. And that is my opinion of Scarface 1920 Bloody Business. Mostly good things with the caveat that it comes to complexity, and then ultimately you have to make the decision as to where you are with Scarface and whether you want that, don't want that, or generally how you're feeling about it. I will say most of the things do integrate well. It's just, I mean, in terms of the gameplay and the game flow, they integrate well. It's just that additional mental rules overhead on top of an already complicated game that is the thing you want to consider. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.